to help young men who might be dabbling with extremism, to help them sort of not do so, to step away from it. One man who might be able to give us some clues is Adam Deen, because he's kind of been there. He used to be a member of an Islamist extremist organisation here in the UK. He's since rejected their view of the world and their view of their own religion, and now tries to challenge extremists about their radical views. He's also managing director at the Quilliam Foundation, which you'll know aims to counter extremism. I began by asking Adam the question that's been troubling me. So when these three men were on their way there to that attack, what, as much as they were capable of rational thought, what was in their minds?
The justification that's going through their minds is that they are going to sacrifice, potentially sacrifice their lives for God, ultimately, and that they are going to reach the height of paradise, that's to be a martyr, in defending Muslims. Because in their mind they believe that this is retribution, and one way to serve their God as a Muslim is to fight and to commit acts of terrorism.
So for them, it's about absolution. It's about forgiveness of whatever sins they've perpetrated and eternal joy in the afterlife. That has been dangled before them, and that's what they're striving for and hope to achieve.
Yes, probably more the latter in this case. They genuinely believe that they are serving God and that they are defending Muslims for the crimes, if you like, of the West. Is West's involvement in Muslim lands and killing of Muslims.
And where have they got this idea from that by doing this they are going to have a joyful life for all eternity? Who's put that into their head? Is that an imam? Is that the internet? Is that various readings? Where does it come from?
I mean, we know now that one of the terrorists was actually associated with this extremist organisation, Islamist organisation, Al-Mahadroon. And I'm quite familiar with their literature because it's my former organisation that I spent a good number of years, about 8 years in. And I know the literature very well. And it starts with defining the person as a Muslim first, that their loyalty is to Islam and God and to the Prophet Muhammad. And what they do is they have this peculiar type of worldview, that it's very us against them, that the only people that are good are those people that accept their understanding, although they don't see it as an interpretation, they see it as the only understanding of the Islamic faith, and everybody else is evil. And effectively, that also includes Muslims that disagree with them. So it's all non-Muslims, Muslims that disagree with them, the West, every way of life that is not conforming to their understanding is considered as being evil. And what happens there is that there is a process of dehumanization of anybody that doesn't follow suit. So these non-Muslims that are being run over, they're just seen as just collateral damage.
But we're always hearing two narratives in the aftermath of one of these attacks. Firstly, it's nothing to do with Islam. Islam's a peaceful religion. Secondly, we get a torrent of texts, people saying it is everything to do with Islam. Islam is it's fundamentally political. It's about doing what these men did. So where does the truth lie?
Yes, and these kind of both ends of the spectrum really do confuse the debate, and they're extremely unhelpful in getting to the bottom of this. And often we hear these sort of apologetic Muslims that, because of their love for their faith, they're blinded that someone could actually use the Islamic faith and interpret it to manifest in these kind of horrific, violent ways. But these Muslims are simply just ignorant and unaware of how these extremists actually become radicalized and how they understand the faith and what kind of evidences they use from scripture we know that ISIS, in every action that they take, they are referring to some form of religious scripture. So these individuals, these Muslims that say that there's nothing to do with Islam, are simply, unfortunately, very ignorant and perhaps blinded by their love for their faith. And the other end of the spectrum is to say that it has everything to do with Islam. Again, these individuals are, what they're doing is they're actually doing the work of the likes of ISIS, because ISIS claim to be authentic Muslims. These terrorists claim to be authentic and following an authentic understanding of Islam. And what these individuals are doing that say stuff like this are actually doing their bidding. They're doing their work for them and helping them propagate this pernicious interpretation of the faith. So the truth is in the middle, that Islam can be interpreted in a number of ways. And some interpretations are tolerant, some interpretations aren't. And when we talk about Islam is just not a book, as in just the Quran. There are other evidences that are used to come out with opinions. And there are books and books of scholarly work that are part of now the Islamic tradition. And unfortunately, within those Islamic traditions and heritage, there are views that can be used to support these kind of acts and have a kind of militancy and have a kind of siege mentality. And we need, and the Muslim communities need to have a frank and honest discussion about those ideas.
Surely it is about just seeing some of the stuff that's in the Quran about, all unbelievers must be killed. And, it does more or less say that, and I paraphrase, obviously, in the Quran, just seeing that in context. Because I'm sure, this might be complete heresy, but you'd find similar sort of bloodthirsty bits of the Old Testament. It's there in all the holy books.
Absolutely. There is an aspect of contextualizing here. And I don't want to sort of misrepresent. I'm not saying Islam is a pacifistic religion. It does have violent verses within the Quran, but there is a point of context here. If you're an extremist Islamist and you read these verses, the way in which you interpret them really does lie on your ideas beforehand, your sort of presuppositions. If you already understand the world being in this kind of stark reality of good and evil, and non-Muslims are evil, and that the West is evil, when you come across those verses that says fight the unbelievers, you will interpret that as meaning any non-Muslim out there could be a target of attack. It's very much to do with these kind of pre-ideas, the kind of presuppositions when the person's actually reading these texts. What in actual fact that they don't understand is that the Quran is actually appealing to a universal ethic, and those verses that are pertaining to the one that you particularly mentioned, the one attacking non-believers, that is the right of conduct in war, jus in bello, if you like, according to just war theory. It is not the right to go to war because they're unbelievers. However, there are Muslim extremist, Muslim extreme ideas, Islamist extremist ideas that say that we can go to war with people simply because they're non-Muslims, and that can be traced back to the Islamic heritage. And all of these sort of things need to be addressed.
Well, you could see how they would take the view: we're not going to war, we are in a war, therefore this does apply to us. That even I can see sort of that sort of simple logic.
Absolutely, and you can take that to that level as well. But the question is, who are the unbelievers that the Quran is talking about? Is it innocent children? Is it innocent children at a pop concert? I mean, are they your enemy? It's not talking about that. it's what the verse when we say, and again, this is a problem to do with the kind of translation. I mean, this particular verse has a historical context. The unbelievers were not people because they didn't believe in Islam. The unbelievers were people that had a hostility and were attacking Muslims, and that the verse was giving them permission to actually engage in warfare, that they could actually defend themselves. Now, that 7th century reality is very different to a pop concert in 2017 with children and innocent people. It's completely different. But if you have a warped understanding of the world, this kind of binary outlook of good and evil, then you will feed that verse through that lens and come out with these warped ideas.
But you speak as somebody who has been bought by these arguments, who's bought into these this theology, and then somehow turned yourself round and saw just how fatuous and evil it was. So what made the difference to you? Who got to you and said, you know, well, this is nonsense, you know, and you must think in another way?
I think the reason, and I think it's interesting to point out why I was sort of taken in by these ideas to begin with. The reason for that was they got to me first. You know, they got to me with these ideas before someone can get to me to inoculate me from these kind of ideas. Because one of the problems with the extremist narrative, it has this veneer of authenticity. It seems quite logical. The Quran says unbelievers in English. These people don't believe in Islam, so therefore it must be fair game to kill them. It seems quite on the surface quite reasonable and logical. But the way in which that I was sort of decided to break away from these ideas was that I was able to talk to people that were former members. I befriended one person in particular, and he was able to sort of take me under his wing and completely change the way that I understood the faith, that it was historical, that there is a historical aspect to the faith, that Islam actually appeals, the Quran actually appeals to a universal ethic, that it actually speaks outside of itself to appeal to universal values in making judgments. You know, all these sort of things really helped me understand that what these extremists were talking about, this kind of over-politicized, kind of puritanical type of reading, was completely false.
So what needs to happen then? I read an article in the Times today saying, an opinion piece essentially saying Islam needs to reform itself completely. It needs to have a reformation, you know, which obviously, you know, Christians did 500 years ago. Is such a thing possible?
I think what Islam needs is a re-enlightenment. I mean, it had an enlightenment period, and that's definitely been lost, and we need the re-enlightenment. And I do believe that we do need to reform the way that we understand this Islamic faith. You know, there was once a time where Islam was a sort of seen as a rationalistic, humanistic religion that was here for the public good. It's no longer seen in that way. It's what we have is this. Islam is now this peculiar entity that sort of resides in its own sphere. It's completely detached from our normal common sensibilities. It doesn't function within our rational sensibilities. And because of this, it's developed in this kind of totalitarian type of belief, and that wants to trump any other ethic that doesn't conform with it. That's not the Islamic faith that once existed. This is an alien version of what I understand of the Islamic faith. And unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, this is seen as an authentic representation, and that needs to be challenged. That if we don't, I think we're going to have more problems. And I genuinely believe that the root of extremism, these individuals using theology, is rooted in that type of interpretation of Islam. If we can get an interpretation of Islam that is not almost amoral, but it is actually appealing to a universal values and a universal ethic, then we can stop individuals thinking and rationalising that they can go and kill innocent people using vans and just mowing them down.
That's Adam Deen, once a believer in radical extremist Islamist thought, now managing director at the Quilliam Foundation, which aims to counter extremism. Coming up after the news.